call and then learn more about the bill. Memphis.
Hello there. Thank God for C-SPAN for bringing these type of issues to the public. I was not aware of this bill until I sat down and watched this debate tonight. I am totally against this bill. It's going to result in less competition. This is about big money and big business. It's going to put a lot of independent insurance agents out of work. It's just a totally bad idea. And I tell you, the American public should be really sick of their representatives going up here and representing big business and big interests and not their constituents, the individual people. We should use this particular vote on this bill as a litmus test. If your representative is voting for this bill, they're not interested in your personal benefit, and you should vote them out of office. Thank you very much.
All right, Memphis on the moderate line. More of your calls a little later. First, we want to get a little more background on this bill. We caught up with a reporter on Capitol Hill earlier who's been covering the issue.
Pamela Barnett of Congress Daily, how did House and Senate negotiators work out their differences on this financial services bill?
Well, I think the short answer to that is a lot of sweat, a lot of late nights, long meetings, private meetings out in the open, just really people literally rolling up their sleeves, taking off their jackets and eating bad food and staying late, looking over legislative language and trying to come to an agreement that all could support. Towards the end of the debate, it really wasn't so much a question of so much of the House and Senate squaring their positions. It was more a question of whether the Clinton administration and one particular Senate player in this debate, whether they could see eye to eye on one rather important provision of the bill.
Expand upon that provision.
Right. That has to do with a community lending program. There's a federal law passed in 1977 called the Community Reinvestment Act. And that act essentially tells banks and lending institutions that you need to lend in the areas in which your banks are situated, be it poor or disadvantaged neighborhood or not. The idea being that you want to try to keep some of the money that you're lending in the same community where you're operating. Chairman Graham, who is the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, that's Phil Graham, former presidential candidate, has had a thorn in his side over this CRA program for many years. It really doesn't sit well with his free market notions, and he's been looking for ways to reform it for many years. This bill became an excellent vehicle for that. And what the debate in the very end boiled down to was, to what degree are community groups who benefit from the CRA, to what degree will they have to report their income, the monies they get from CRA, and to what degree will they have to detail what they're doing with the money?
How was it ultimately resolved?
Well, it was ultimately resolved, I'd say, in the senator's favor, in that the reporting requirements are now in place. They're fairly strict, have to be fairly detailed, and there has to be an accounting of those expenses at least once a year, both on the part of the bank doing the lending and of the community groups doing the receiving of the money, and this is all under the rubric of the CRA.
What other issues were on the table to be resolved?
Well, towards the end, that really was the sole issue, but there were several other issues in weeks and months and years previous. Privacy, consumer privacy, was a big one, and that was ultimately resolved as well, not to the degree that I'm sure some Democrats and Republicans would have liked, but the crafters of the bill managed to hit a kind of middle ground. Certainly what they've settled upon goes further than anything under current law. And the issue really has to do with how much protection your personal financial information should be given in this new regime, in this new modernized financial industry where you'll have banks and insurance companies and brokerages intermingling more or less freely. How much freedom do you have in terms of holding on to your information, and how much freedom should your financial institutions have in sharing your various pieces of information with their new affiliates? Your bank may have a new insurance affiliate that wants to share your banking account information, and perhaps you don't feel comfortable with that. That was what this debate centered on. How do we strike the right balance between consumer protection and the needs of these new entities to share information in the normal course of business?
So what ended up in the final package?
Well, the final package contains several provisions. One explicitly states that a consumer can opt out of having his or her personal financial information shared by their bank with an unaffiliated third party, which just means that if the entity the bank would like to share with is not legally affiliated with the bank, then the sharing cannot take place unless you opt out of that and say, no, that's okay. There's a provision which says flat out, regardless of the permission of the consumer, that a bank cannot share any account number information with an unaffiliated third party for telemarketing purposes. And there's just a strict ban on that. And the new law that was crafted last week also makes clear that if there is a state law regarding privacy already on the books regarding consumer financial privacy, that if it is tougher and more helpful towards consumers than is the federal law, then the federal law cannot supersede what it is the states have done.
Is President Clinton expected to sign this measure?
Oh, yes. He has made that very clear through his various officials he works with. They've sent letters to the Hill this week, both to top Senate and Republican leaders, saying that they're awaiting passage of the bill. They're strongly supportive of it, and have pretty much let it be known that there's going to be no problem when it comes time to sign the bill.
What's the ultimate impact for consumers and users of the banking system?
Well, I think that there could be a difference of opinion on that point. I think that whatever impacts the average consumer feels from this, it won't be immediate, and it won't be nearly as striking as one might think would be the result of a bill that was so long in the making. In essence, and the most important thing the bill does is allow for barriers to be lifted between commercial and investment banking, and also between the affiliation of banks and insurance firms. So with those barriers lifted, and bear in mind they already have been lifted to a certain extent through various regulatory actions, but now with the federal law in place, there'll be, it's suspected, many more mergers, consolidations between banks and insurance companies, banks and banks. So the notion is that you could likely see a winnowing down of the number of options in terms of individual financial institutions that you can do business with. By that same token, that gets you into the one-stop shopping concept, which is it could prove much more convenient for a consumer who can go to one company, get all of their needs met, get a mortgage, buy life insurance, do their investing, and have that all under one roof with the company that knows a lot about you, and a lot of people might find that comforting.
Pamela Barnett, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
So the House, toward the end of this vote on the rules for debate on this financial services measure, if this resolution passes next, we would see an hour of general debate on this conference report, which the Senate passed earlier today, a vote of 90-8. We'll use the last few moments of this vote to hear more of your views on this issue. We'll start in Plantation, Florida. You're calling on our